Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We've talked so much about the role of Russia in Syria, and today we're putting the spotlight on Iran. Its fighters that it backs are the ones who are doing most of the fighting on the ground in Aleppo as the city falls and as the president of Iran sends congratulatory messages to his Syrian counterpart. We're talking about it in the company of Borzu Daragahi, Middle East correspondent for BuzzFeed News, who joins us from Istanbul. From New York, Ben Taub, contributing writer for The New Yorker, and here in the studio, attorney and commentator Ardavan Amir Aslani. By the way, Turkey's president has been speaking with his Russian counterpart to try to revive the truce that lasted only hours in Aleppo. This as a convoy of Islamic charities set off from where Borzu is, Istanbul, with a call to activists to drive to the Syrian border in solidarity with Aleppo. Recep Tayyip Erdogan talking about dialogue with Moscow, but showing no sign of wavering over how he feels about Russia's ally in Damascus.
A humanitarian corridor must be opened immediately without any obstruction or sabotage. Permission must be granted for innocent people to leave East Aleppo safely. Assad's regime is clearly committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Aleppo. Everybody needs to see this reality, including those who give him their support.
All right, Borzu Daragahi, before the break, we were saying how, for our viewers who are following this cold, they're confused when they see Iran as a potential foe in Aleppo and a potential friend in Mosul over in Iraq. What about Turkey? Talking about warming relationships with Moscow, but still pointing the finger at Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balancing act. Turkey is a major patron of both the Syrian opposition and the Syrian armed groups. It provides them with a lot of sustenance, and it provides them with a lot of freedom to maneuver in and out of Turkey, allows Turkish opposition groups, civil society activists, doctors, and rebel groups, armed groups, in and out, to go in and out of Turkey, use the hospitals here. It sees itself as a sort of a protector of those mostly Sunni Syrian rebels, in the same way that Iran sees itself sort of as a protector of the Shia militias that are fighting in the country. And, you know, with Russia, it's a delicate balancing act. It's true. They're on the opposite side on the issue of Syria, but they have a lot of other interests that coincide. And it's the same thing with Turkey and Iran as well. Turkey and Iran find themselves, you know, vehemently on the opposite side of the issue of Syria. But the amount of trade between the two countries is, you know, up there. I forget exactly, but it's you know, at this point well above $15 billion a year, and the business continues and the business deals continue.
Ben Taub, your thoughts on this, because we talked a little bit about the Kurds in part one of our discussion. They're friends of the United States. They're friends of Russia. And yet they're the ones that are in Syria are the enemies these days of President Erdogan.
Yes, that's certainly true. They have their own interests. Everything. I mean, one of the reasons that Syria is so complicated and hard to parse is that each of these competing groups has its own interests, and sometimes they overlap, and sometimes in one part of the country that means an alliance with a group that in another part of the country they would be at war with. But I think one important thing that that Erdogan touched on, which, well, he made an allegation about war crimes and crimes against humanity, but we often hear that word as, you know, allegations. We hear the UN talk about, you know, maybe there are war crimes happening, but this is really important, that the Rome Statute is totally unambiguous. The Geneva Convention is totally unambiguous about what these war crimes are. I have here, this is the Rome Statute, and if I could just read what crimes against humanity and war crimes are, the list is very, very clear. So crimes against humanity are widespread or systematic attacks against the civilian population, including murder, forced displacement, as we're seeing in Aleppo right now, imprisonment illegally, torture, rape, persecution, enforced disappearance, other inhumane acts, or extermination, including the deprivation of access to food and medicine calculated to bring about the destruction of a population. War crimes include willful killing. This would be as part of a large-scale policy, willful killing, torture, excessive destruction of property beyond military necessity, compelling prisoners of war to fight on behalf of captors, which is happening for males who are leaving Aleppo, as we've seen, willfully depriving prisoners of war of the rights to a fair trial, unlawful deportation, again, as we're seeing in Aleppo,
Right,
intentional directs. Yeah, go ahead.
No,
I mean, there's like, you go through the document, it's everywhere.
Sure, we get the point. But the question is, what do you do with that document at this particular point in time? Let me read to you one of the comments on the hashtag F24 debate. Retaliation and retribution follow almost every conflict. On what scale they occur in Aleppo is largely determined not by Assad, but by Iran. So the people, viewers meeting out blame, differing on who to blame for everything.
I mean, you know, it's in this sort of environment, you know, the victor always applies justice, regardless of what international law says. And you know, that's just the nature and reality of the Middle East at this point. You know, you have basically victor's justice in this part of the world. And rarely does anyone pay a price for whether it's Israel or Hamas or Iran or Iraqi Shia militias or Sunni insurgents, rarely does anyone pay any kind of price for the crimes they commit. And when they do pay a price, it's usually so out of proportion, so bloody, that it also becomes a war crime. The price becomes a war crime as well. And that's just what we've seen, you know, over the last few decades in this part of the world.
Ardavan Amir-Aslani, last year there was the sealing of the deal that thawed relations between Iran and the international community, Iran gaining a little bit of traction, winning a bit of sympathy from the international community, rising in soft power. When you see reactions like that, the one of that viewer there, Iran winning, yes, militarily in Aleppo, but perhaps losing the public relations battle.
I don't think that it is fair to consider that Iran is behind what is happening in Aleppo. You don't have Iranian troops, per se, fighting in Aleppo.
They've lost 1,000 men in Aleppo.
Yes, but there are hundreds of thousands of people who are dead in Syria. 1,000 men from Iran is not, you know, tens of thousands of Iranian soldiers. Iran is involved in Syria, as it is involved in Iraq, but you don't have actually Iranian troops over there. You have Iranian-formed militias that are actually very active on the ground. I don't think it is fair to consider that what is happening today in Aleppo is specifically Iran's fault. But we should also bear in mind, I mean, that it is easy to consider what is happening today as a crime of genocide, as it is being mentioned, and rightly mentioned so. But when you look around all over these horrendous conflicts, the way ISIS behaved in taking over Mosul, killing and decapitating thousands of Iraqi soldiers, or what they've done in Christian cities in Syria, atrocities have been committed by both parties so far. The notion that we have to deal with today is this a just cause or not for Syria? Is Assad on the right side of history in fighting what they consider as terrorists or not? Because the issue is going to be, are there any moderate terrorists around or moderate Islamists around in Syria? If you recall, a couple of months back, we discovered that the American government spent $400 million in trying to train moderate Syrian rebels. At the end of the program, you only had 10 of them fighting on the ground. So who are these people? Who's arming them? So when you look at the situation today, you are looking at a situation whereby you have Iran, who no longer has any inhibitions whatsoever in defending its Shia allies elsewhere, who's acting very aggressively in the country. So are all those who are trying to back the other Sunni opposition members. The Saudis are massively involved in providing the ideological background for ISIS and the other Islamist movements, providing the financing. Turkey, it was just mentioned, is out there providing the access to the troops, providing hospital services, medical care for all those that are fighting the Assad regime. We should not here finger point at anyone in particular. What is happening today in Aleppo is a tragedy. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with a horrendous civil war.
Borzu Dargahi.
I mean, this is a line that, you know, and you asked originally, is Iran losing the PR fight? No, because there's a lot of people who believe what your friend believes, that, you know, are there moderate terrorists there? This sort of sarcasm about the Syrian rebel opposition groups, who are possibly among the most, it's probably the most unfairly maligned cause in the world right now. You know, these are people, even a group like Ahrar al-Sham, that has some jihadi elements in it, that if you look at them, if you talk with them, if you meet them, they are not any more religious or pious than the average person in the Arab world right now. There are some extremists, there are jihadis among the Syrian rebel opposition groups, but there are also many, many people who are no more religious, no more extreme than anyone else in the outskirts of Cairo or the outskirts of Tripoli, Libya. I've lived in the Arab world now for many, many years, and there is nothing that extreme about these rebel groups. I talk to them all the time. I'm an Iranian. I'm supposedly an enemy, and they talk to me. They make friends with me. I know spokespeople, political officers for the Syrian rebel groups who are Christian, who drink, who don't pray, and so on. This is like there's a real slander campaign against the Syrian rebels, and it's absolutely inaccurate to say that there's one program that was about training Syrian rebels to fight against ISIS, and that program was a disaster. It didn't produce a lot of fighters.
Thank you for acknowledging.
But there was, you didn't note it, there was one program, but there was also the CIA program that's been going on and on and on, and they've been financing and supporting and training and equipping Syrian rebels fighting Bashar al-Assad for several years now, and that's thousands of people.
So
who,
let me ask you about that,
get
Borzu.
support there.
Borzu, let me ask you about that, because now we have a new president who's coming in, one who's very tough on Iran. In fact, his national security advisor is particularly tough on Iran.
Pompeo,
who has Flynn, who said that most notably that he even blamed Iran for the attack on the embassy in Benghazi, the consulate in Benghazi, which of course has been uncorroborated anywhere. But on the other hand, you have Trump, who's making friendly noises towards Moscow. So where is it going to go in relation to Iran really after January the 20th?
And he also says that he doesn't want the U.S. to get involved in any foreign wars. We have no idea, and I think that's it's a real variable in terms of which Trump is going to emerge and who Trump actually is. This is a different discussion in many ways, and this kind of discussion about Trump's foreign policy, it applies to many theaters, not just the Middle East, not just Syria, but it's a real dilemma. On the one hand, he talks about being tough on Iran. On the other hand, he's basically his policy platform for Syria is handing Syria to Iran and Russia as a sort of ward state for those countries. So it's not clear, it's not consistent, and it's rather confusing. I guess we'll start to find out in the months after January 20th.
McFlynn, a national security advisor, Mattis, Secretary of Defense, or even the Homeland Security, Kelly, fellow that was designated recently, all of these are anti-Iranian people. And they all go back, they're Marine soldiers, they all go back to the barracks in Beirut. But that being said, the policy that was coming out of the future White House from the president-elect is that of identifying radical Islam, jihadist Islam, as an enemy of the United States. And we can see today the silence of the United States and the silence of the international community with what's happening over there locally in Iran, in Syria. So no matter how you look at it, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the Americans are seeing today Iranian-backed Shia militias fighting those very people that the president-elect has qualified as the most important enemy out there against Washington's interests.
But they're
not. They're not fighting against ISIS at all.
But
I'm
sure
not
that
even the Hezbollah guy was complaining to me that they have not been sent to fight against ISIS.
No, I don't know which Hezbollah guy that you've been talking to, but I'm sure that Iranian troops in Mosul, their allies, are fighting ISIS. What are they doing in Mosul then?
Who
are they fighting?
ISIS.
Oh, they're just hanging around town.
In Syria, they're not fighting against ISIS.
So in Iraq, at least we agree on Iraq.
Yes, they are.
Okay, so Iran is not an entity that is encouraging ISIS to survive. Iran is fighting ISIS.
Ardavan, you were very early on this panel to say, we're going to have with Rouhani this opening that's going to happen. And this
it is happening. It is happening.
There's a strong sense, though, that it could be all over after January the 20th.
I don't think so, because people are witnessing what's happening. If the Iranian allies in Mosul, if the Syrian government in Aleppo and Palmyra and elsewhere, they don't finish off, because I'm not at all in agreement with this concept that these are moderate, secular people fighting for democracy. They're not. In my opinion, they're Islamic radical jihadists out there. So I believe that if Iran and their allies don't finish off these fanatic terrorists locally, what's going to happen is that we'll have to fight these same people in Paris, in London, and elsewhere. That's what's going to happen. And that's why the Americans have acknowledged today that the theory of encirclement of what is happening in Mosul is an asset, because this will prevent these terrorists from leaving Mosul, going elsewhere.
But isn't it a bit callous to say that when civilians are getting
No, that's
killed?
a tragedy, and no one out there is going to approve of this massacre. It's awful. It's awful today. It was awful yesterday. It's going to be awful tomorrow. There's no approval of anybody in this regard. It's a civil war that's going out there. In a civil war, there are casualties, and it's a tragedy, and it's unfortunate. And the comments of the New Yorker correspondent saying that this is probably maybe qualified as a war crime is true. But this doesn't change anything as far as the fight against radical Islam that is happening in Iraq and Syria. That's a fact.
I'm going to wait. I'd like to wait for the next time that, because I am so tired of this sort of ideological brand of people. And I'm going to wait to see the next time that Israel attacks Palestinians in some way or launches a war against Gaza, whether he will agree with the same rhetoric that, the same kind of misguided rhetoric that is used in
depicting wait and see what's going to happen then, and we'll judge them
radical terrorists.
We'll judge them together.
I'm just saying, because I've heard this kind of rhetoric before, and it's wrong when Raymond.
Don't do this. I'm not doing this to you.
It's wrong when Michael Flynn. It's wrong when Michael Flynn uses that kind of rhetoric, and it's wrong when someone else uses that kind of rhetoric.
It's not rhetoric, unfortunately. I would have loved for it to be rhetoric. It's about war.
Borzo, let me ask you a question on this.
It's about miscasting and misunderstanding an entire social movement, a revolution that was prompted by the brutality of a dictator as a bunch of terrorists.
That's your interpretation,
and
that
not
I
even
respect.
Speaking to. Have you ever spoken to one Syrian rebel? Have you ever spoken to one Syrian rebel fighter or commander, ever?
I'm sorry, do you mind repeating?
Anyway.
Borzo, let me ask you.
I'm asking.
Go ahead, ask me. I missed the question. I'm sorry, the micro came off. Have I ever met whom? I have met people who've had their heads chopped off. I've seen women who've been sold on the market by these same people that you have a tendency to consider that they are secular-loving, democracy-loving people. Go and talk to those who were in Malula, in Syria. Go and talk to those thousands of Syrians, Yazidi Iraqis who were enslaved.
Every day. That's my job.
Yeah, please go and talk to the Yazidi people and ask them what they think of these moderate opponents that you think they're out there.
That's not the. That's ISIS.
So
that's not the Syrian rebels.
Okay, there are no ISIS movements,
not the Syrian
ISIS forces in Syria. ISIS is only contained in Iraq.
And the Syrian rebels are the ones who are fighting them. The Syrian rebels are the ones who are fighting them.
One at a time, or else the viewer can't hear anything. Borzo, let me ask you just one question on this, because time is running short. Iran at daggers drawn over sectarian reasons, with its regional rival Saudi Arabia, and yet the two reaching a deal when it comes to oil production. So we're a bit confused on that.
Welcome
as well.
to the Middle East. It's about pursuing your interests, and about no one wants an all-out war between no Iranian leader, no Saudi leader wants an all-out war with the other country, even though they don't like each other. And this is the kind of conflict that is fought by proxy. You don't want to. You try different ways of bolstering your ideological and strategic position, short of all-out war. And when it comes to an issue like oil, when you have overlapping interests, you see pragmatic interests taking over, pragmatic reasoning taking over, and they make a deal on the oil issue, even though they can't make a deal on Syria.
One final question. I'll put it to you, Ben Taub. Your thoughts on how an incoming Trump administration is going to handle Syria?
Well, it's very worrying, to be honest, because while he's we have no idea, frankly, because Trump has been totally inconsistent on everything because he doesn't seem to understand anything about foreign policy whatsoever, and his positions change depending on who he's speaking with and who last spoke to him. Furthermore, the only thing he's been consistent on is his alignment with Russia, including his various appointments, and his total disinterest in human rights and in international law. He has advocated for committing more crimes too. And beyond that, I would say the third thing that he's been consistent in, which is especially perhaps terrifying, is this similar conflation that we've been hearing today, that Borzu correctly pointed out, of anyone against the Syrian government being a terrorist, and that if you completely losing all of the nuance of vast range of opinions and allegiances among various groups throughout quite a large country, and Trump is applying a similar kind of smear campaign toward Muslims in America, toward Muslims in France and other parts of the world. And what's very, very troubling is that now he's inheriting a world where the application of international law doesn't exist, and his disinterest in human rights and his realignment with Moscow is especially troubling as we look ahead.
All right, there too. We will see after January the 20th. Ben Taub, I want to thank you for joining us from New York. Borzu Daragahi in Istanbul. Ardavan Amir Aslani.
Thank you for having me.
Stay with us.
Thank
Our
you.
Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
So, yeah, the fall of Aleppo playing out on many levels.
Yes, absolutely. And if we take a look at the things that are being said online and on social media, one thing that people are saying loud and clear is that there is a lot of frustration, anger and disappointment, and a will that something more be done. Taking a look at this particular cartoon from Wings, which is a take on the mannequin challenge, where people are filmed not moving, and it's something that's been on...
Mannequin challenge at the UN, it says.
Yes, it says mannequin challenge at the UN, nobody move, and of course they are looking at the images of Aleppo with bombs raining down on it, and of course the criticism is implicit that the UN is doing nothing to stop it. And elsewhere, other people have criticism and calls for action. Aleppo is an example of what happens when the US, NATO and others are willing to subcontract regional security work to the Russians, says this Twitter user. Another one says, Holland is summoning the Russian and Iranian ambassadors to protest the siege on Aleppo. And he's asking, basically, what about the rest of the world? Why isn't the rest of the world recalling these ambassadors to get answers and to make their feelings known about what's happened in Aleppo? Now, from inside Aleppo itself, obviously, some people are tweeting, including Mr. Alhamdo, who is a well-known teacher and activist who's been tweeting very widely and is deemed to be something of a reporter from within the sort of the rebel camp, the side of eastern Aleppo. And what he said is Russia is interested in its interests. Iran has got other interests. What about ours? This is why it is not a civil war, because, of course, that's what it started out as. But now we have other players involved. Bana Alabed, the 7-year-old, who we've heard a great deal about because she's been tweeting for the last few months, she and her mother... Purportedly, there are claims that it is a fake account. There are claims that it's propaganda. But the girl herself has been interviewed by different broadcasters.
Oh, the girl is real. No,
the girl is real, and I suppose it depends whether you believe that a 7-year-old girl in Syria would be that good at that good an actress that she could fool people into believing that she is a genuine campaigner. But her mother, in this case, Fatima, has tweeted this one to Turkey's foreign minister. We had hope yesterday, but what's happening now? Please help us. No more time left. Because, of course, there was supposed to be this evacuation. Then it all grinds to a halt because of continued bombing. Now, one other person facing a great deal of criticism online is the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations. Bashar Jafari held up a photograph as he tried to say that the Syrian army had done nothing wrong yesterday in response to the claim that 82 civilians had been killed, summary executions, basically, of people, including women and children. Here he is holding up the photograph, and it says, "This is what the Syrian army is doing in Aleppo." However, that is not the full story. That photograph actually comes from Fallujah. It was taken in June when that area was liberated from Islamic State control. So that is a very unfortunate spread of fake news done by Syria's ambassador to the United Nations. Now, lots of people obviously talking about this Syrian crisis, especially with the fall of Aleppo. Some people still feel it isn't enough. There are certain people calling for direct action, including the Syria campaign. They've published this, along with the phone numbers of every foreign ministry and foreign affairs office around the world, so that people across the globe can contact somebody and talk about how they feel the world should be reacting to what's happening in Aleppo. And we're also seeing a lot of articles like this one from Vogue magazine, of all things. Here's what's happening in Aleppo, and here's what you can do to help. Now, Vogue talks about giving, gives a number of options for giving donations to charity, but it also contains some stirring words. Make no mistake, what is happening in Aleppo right now, what no less than UN humanitarian chief Stephen O'Brien called our generation's shame, is an atrocity. It is genocide. It is time to pay attention. So stirring words there from Vogue magazine, of all things.
All right, many thanks for that, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.